We have a lot to go over tonight. So I'm going to do quick introductions so we can get into some of the questions. And we're going to do a little bit of housekeeping to help people understand how Joey's Legacy works. Because sometimes it gets a little confusing and it takes us away from our mission, which is to try to get these cases through as fast as we can and get them doing what they need to do, which is to get our laws changed, the board changed, the vet, and ultimately save lives of the dogs that are dying and being mistreated. So really quickly, of course, if you don't know, you need to know who the founder of Joey's Legacy is, which is Scott Fine. Hi, Scott.
Hello, Carrie. How are you?
I'm great. I know we have so much, so I'm going to, we get to so many questions and they're hard, so we're going to go through it pretty quickly. But if you want to learn more about Scott, I will tell you that I did a podcast with Scott a while back. You can hear the whole story on there. It's about an hour and a half that we spent kind of learning about what happened with Joey, so you can watch that. But Scott's here tonight. And the organization could not and would not and should not run without our attorneys and veterinarians. So when we do these podcasts, we always have these fabulous vets and attorneys that come on. So our veterinarian tonight is Dr. Robin Cannizzaro. Hi, Dr. Cannizzaro. How are you?
Hello, Carrie. I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great. And you are just so giving with your time for this organization that it's just such a blessing to be here with you.
Well, it's my pleasure, and it's an honor to be part of a group that's really shaking and making change.
We're seeing it. We're seeing it's happening. We're seeing it. And I think our next person on tonight is our attorney, Anna Riccardotti, who is going to be able to help us see some of the changes that are happening. So Anna, welcome. Thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we have so many questions and stuff. We were just talking before we came on live and we were saying, oh, it looks like Anna's going to be busy tonight. So much stuff going on. But one of the things I always want to talk about, and I know a lot of the people who come on, but I know we have definitely some new people that are coming on. I've had people reach out to me that were excited to be here tonight. So we talk a lot about veterinary malpractice, but I think sometimes people, don't really know what that is, and they need a definition. Can you give us a little definition?
Sure. I mean, I always go right back to the Merriam-Webster definition of malpractice, because it's a dereliction of professional duty or a failure to exercise an ordinary degree of professional skill or learning by one, rendering professional services, which results in an injury. So for veterinarians, you're looking just like at any other profession, whether it's, human doctors, lawyers, accountants. You want to see, there's a reasonable standard of care. And you look at it's really in two parts. You look to see if the veterinarian breached that standard of care. And if so, did that breach lead to the damages that were suffered? So it could be an injury to an animal or loss of that animal. But those are the two prongs that you really have to look at. And to prove a malpractice case, you really have to prove both. So That's basically it in a nutshell. It's not always just negligence. It's any kind of improper practice or malfeasance. So it can be broader than negligence, can be less. It can be simply negligence, meaning not intentional act, just like a mistake. But you really are looking at those two prongs and you're applying them. And that's why you need the vet experts to look at it to see, because an attorney really doesn't know what a veterinarian does. So you have to go to the person in that skill who's skilled in that art to say if there was a breach of the standard of care, and but for that breach, the damages would not have been suffered.
Yeah, the definition is important because so many things happen when our animals are out of our sight. And a lot of times people want to blame when it in fact doesn't fall under that definition. And so a lot of time is wasted, a lot of emotion, a lot of, anger, and things get said when in fact, if not for, what do you always say? If not, but for, right? If not, but for, which is what we kind of learned. But Scott, real quick, before we get real deep into this, when this organization first started, and we always talk about veterinary malpractice, but we're finding that this loss of life of animals, and not just loss of life, and Dr. Cannizzaro is going to help me out with this. It's not just that they lose their life, but we're seeing it in boarding facilities, daycare facilities, grooming shops, right? Dog walkers. We had a case on here not too long ago that was from, what was that?
Doggy
the
daycare.
Online.
Doggy
it was that
daycare
online place. What's it called?
Oh, yeah,
Rover.com.
Rover.com.
So rover.com. And so we're seeing all sorts of stuff that is happening everywhere. And it comes down to the fact, like we've talked about before, Anna, our pets are seen as property. And so that's really what the fight really is about, right, Scott, is us changing that belief system and getting these animals to be seen as a lot more than just property so that we can raise the standard of care. Which brings me to Dr. Cannizzaro, and then I'm going to get into some of these questions, is that the standard of care is really low, right? What we're seeing.
I think, yes, it is low, but it's also ambiguous because it depends on it literally depends on a board member's determination of whether or not it was below standard of care. Now, I'm not talking about situations that are blatantly obvious, they cut off the wrong leg or, something like that. But some of the cases that are a little bit more difficult to tease through. In addition, I think we have a lot of difficulty connecting the veterinary medical records to what really happened. And whether that is omission, I find a lot of omission when there is no negligence or malpractice just in reviewing records when I have clients come to me on a regular basis, because I always ask for the medical records. So imagine that on a day-to-day basis and then fill in for something catastrophic happening and having a lot of missing information on the records. So I'm not sure exactly how to remedy that while veterinarians try to cram in more and more patients in a very short, tiny little time slot. I don't know how that gets rectified, but it's not in the pet person's interest to have insufficient records. That really doesn't reflect exactly what went on, whether it be a fatal circumstance or a non-fatal circumstance, or just wanting some additional information in the records just because you want to move on to a different veterinarian or something.
So we've talked about this before on the show, and this evening I posted out to all of my followers that we were going to go live, and I always put out there that most people don't want to get involved in Joey's legacy because they think, not that they don't want to, but they don't find the value of it because they don't think this could ever happen to them. And I have always said it has already happened to you, and people think, well, no, because my dog didn't die. And they get this idea that veterinary malpractice or negligence,
maybe not yet.
Right. But you and I often say that veterinary malpractice, veterinary negligence, grooming, like this stuff happens on a daily basis. It's just that you don't find out about it until much later. One of the things we talk about is vaccinating sick dogs.
Right.
That is probably one of the biggest things I think happens to every single dog is they come in with an ear infection. That is not a healthy dog. And then they're vaccinated while they're there or given flea and tick medication while they're sick. So I wanted to point that out because when people are listening to this, at least my followers, I really want you to stay on and listen because I'm trying to protect your animals from this happening. And that's why Dr. Cannizzaro is here so that we can kind of look at all of the things that are happening and how you avoid it and questions to ask and all of that stuff. That's one of my big reasons for being on the board with you guys is to educate so it doesn't happen and make the veterinarians and groomers and everybody else accountable when it does happen. So those are my goals. But I'm going to jump into some questions here for you guys. Dr. Cannizzaro, this comes across to you. And sometimes I'm just going to really quick little housekeeping. When you guys are sending in questions to us, if you could try to make them very, very specific and quick and to the point, because it's really hard to for me to read through everything that's being said. But this question says to Dr. Cannizzaro, a situation with my dog has a cyst on his prostate. Everything we read and looked up, it says that the survival rate is 80 to 90% recovery rate. Just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Obviously, it would depend upon where the cyst is located, which could be pretty easily determined with an ultrasound. I say that, however, the prostate can live in the pelvic canal and sometimes can be difficult to visualize via ultrasound. You can't see as much on X-ray. Certainly you could on CT scan or MRI. So it depends on where the cyst is located, but most of the time they don't pose much difficulty at all. and the survival rate should be really high. That's how I would answer that, if I understand the question correctly.
Yeah, yeah. I know people, we weren't on last week, and so a lot of times people are waiting for us to come. I wasn't on last week, so I know we've got some kind of all over the page questions, so it's going to be real hard for me to keep us kind of concise. So I want to get through these questions first. Then we're going to be talking about with Anna, we're going to talk a little bit about mediation. We're going to be talking about how to write these papers, how to get your paperwork together, and all of those kind of things. As your questions are still coming in, we have some stuff that people want to talk about. Here's another question. This one is for you, Anna. Wondering if the state is investigating a case on your behalf and they can get phone records for you. Would you be able to get them from him, or do you have to get them for them yourself? Just curious, because at this point we are only do small claims court. Might change though.
Yeah, so if you're talking about the disciplinary route and the like civil claims route, those are two parallel. They're different tracks. They're run parallel because they involve some of the same information. But if you're working with the disciplinary body, they're not going. Their intention is not to help you with your civil case. It's not that they wouldn't want to necessarily, but their intention is looking at the rules, looking at discipline, looking at the professional codes that are active in that particular state. They may be able to get you compensation depending on whether they have restitution or something for maybe a botched procedure or something to that end. But I don't think it's their job, to get the records for you. And if you're in small claims court, which we're going to cover a little later on, is to like kind of what the dollar values are, there may not, depending on your state, be any discovery. So you couldn't necessarily issue a subpoena without the judge's, approval, to get phone records or something like that. So it's kind of on you to get phone records, like from your phone company, to say, like, if you're trying to show I called in, on these particular dates at this particular time, you may be able to ask for those from your company, or you may be able to prove those, through your bills or other, documents to show that, yes, I made these calls. But as far as the state agency, if they're doing disciplinary proceedings, that's really not their role, is to provide those documents to you. And in fact, a lot of disciplinary authorities, like in Illinois, it's IDFPR, they may not tell you, what's going on, in the case. You can write in, you can ask them, you can ask for updates, but unless they go public with discipline, it may never actually be made of record.
It gets so, when these things happen, whether it is the death of your animal or you just feel like your animal wasn't given the standard of care that it needs, you're all of a sudden thrown into so much. You have a vet usually that you trusted and cared and believed in, and then this happens, and then now all of a sudden you're talking to attorneys, you got to figure out court, and it gets really, really difficult. So really quickly, before we get into some more of this, I just want to explain how Joey's Legacy works. So if you have a case, or you believe you might have a case that can go to attorney, the first thing is a email or a phone call that goes to Scott. Bless him. He goes through all of these, reading, finding out what's going on. Scott then sends it to one of the wonderful veterinarians who take their time to read through it to see if this looks like it's below the standard of care, if it is something that they think absolutely, maybe falsifying records. Sometimes they can see that. And then from there, it goes to the attorney. And that's the process that it goes through. So it can take some time, and it takes some understanding. So before we started the show, we were talking a little bit to Dr. Cannizzaro about some of the challenges that she faces in order to make sure that these cases go through and have the best chance possible. So Dr. Cannizzaro, can you explain a little of those challenges that you're having when you're getting these cases sent over from Scott?
Sure. I'll be happy to. I think that the process is getting a little more streamlined, because I think that the listeners are getting the idea that we do want to provide a lot of records. But I want you to be really patient with us, because most of us who are doing this have full-time practices, which means that we are taking care of our own clients. And obviously we have our own lives also, and that we have to take care of and care for. So all of us, I can speak for myself particularly, I'm doing my best to try to get through the cases. So it does require a lot of patience. My understanding is that usually the statute of limitations is pretty reasonable. There's a good amount of time. And one of the misunderstandings I think a lot of pet parents have is they say, well, couldn't you just look through this really quickly and tell me? That's sort of like asking your attorney if they could just kind of breeze through your case and tell you if you have a case. If I don't comb through the records with a fine-tooth comb and pay detailed attention, there's an awful lot that I can miss. And if I miss things, you're not going to have a case, and you may have a strong case. So the answer is no, I can't just breeze through it. I know that everybody would like to spend less money and less time and, make the process faster. But if you're bringing a case to the forefront, it obviously is important enough to you that you want us to look carefully and make sure that we don't miss anything. Even on our best day, we could miss something. So if we skim over materials, we're going to miss a lot, or
Yeah.
I believe we'll miss a lot. So that does take time. And then the letter writing process, of course, I always ask permission because there's additional cost to write a letter. And I tell people what it is up front, et cetera. So be patient. If I make a grammatical error, I'm happy to go back and fix it. Once I render my opinion, sometimes I'm being asked to rephrase things and change things, and it might sound even pretty lawyerish. And, I feel that that's pretty disingenuous. And I'm not even sure that that's really wise in your case for me to do. And if I feel that there is wrongdoing, I'm going to say there's wrongdoing. Or if I feel that it was below the standard of care, I'm going to say it's below the standard of care. If you don't like the chosen language that I've used and you would have preferred me to use a different word, words have similar meanings. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to be writing a letter that sounds like an attorney going after the individuals. So be patient with us. We're not attorneys. We're rendering opinions. And those opinions do need to be looked at and interpreted by your attorney to give you an idea if they feel that you have a strong enough case. But it's very stressful to come back, and I'm going to have to comb back through the records to refamiliarize myself with how I arrived at the opinions in order to try to change anything substantive in a letter I've already written. So be patient with us. I really have to sort through how strongly I feel about that because, again, I don't want to start to take my letter apart and make big changes in it. I think that that'll be disingenuous, and I don't think it's going to stand up well in court. But Anna could probably have more to say about that.
No, I just wanted to chime in. I agree with Dr. Cannizzaro, because one of the things you want to be really careful about is how you correspond with the experts, because the experts' purpose is to give you, as best as possible, their unbiased, review of whether you have a case or not. And the last thing you want to do is to dive into a case where you don't have a chance. You definitely want the expert to look it over thoroughly. And if they find a breach of the standard of care, and but for that breach, there would not have been the damages that were suffered, then great. That's something you can use, and you would have to use for malpractice. But if when you're, I guess, providing these materials to the expert, really the only thing you want to provide are the records and possibly a timeline. Because one of the things we found is that records are rarely 100% complete, but they are generally considered like a prima facie proof of what happened, because the courts look at records and they say, well, people keep these business records as they do, just every day, matter of course. They're not looking to falsify them or not. We have caveats to that when there has been falsification after the fact. But generally speaking, that's one of the reasons we recommend that every time you go to the vet, you get the records, not just the invoice. They give you the invoice every time, but ask for the records, and you have to ask usually in writing. Every state has a little bit different laws on discipline, but if you ask a veterinarian, if you ask in writing for those records, they generally have to give them to you. And then if you have the records, that's something the vet, can review. But when you're asking for a review, you really just want to ask the expert to please review, these records and the timeline. And the timeline can include if there's omissions in the records or things like that. But you don't want to have abundant correspondence with the experts, because in a lot of states, mine included, you have to produce that in discovery. So if it looks like you're trying to bend the expert's will in one way or other, that's just going to bias your expert, and it's going to make your case really weak. So you don't want to do that.
we've talked about this before, Dr. Canizero. I always say this because I constantly hear my clients say that their vet, a week's gone by, 2 weeks have gone by, and they still can't get their records. What is a reasonable time to expect a veterinarian to get the records to you?
Typically speaking, and I can't say what the law is for every state, but a reasonable amount of time is generally considered a week.
Okay.
Usually veterinarians will produce them either right away or within 3 days. But if it's been more than 1 week, I think that that's excessive, in my opinion.
Okay. I thought so too, but and it concerns me because I think, what is the holdup? I mean, there are some, I'm sure, some circumstances like they went out of the country or something could happen. I don't know. So I think we have to be conscious of that and, considerate of those little tiny things that could happen. But in general, when I'm hearing, I just had a woman tell me she cannot get her x-rays and she has been trying and trying. And I don't know how long now it's been, but it just seems excessive to me to get the copies of the x-rays. That shouldn't even take but a click of, whatever, depending on how they're doing it.
Most veterinary offices have digital x-rays these days. It's pretty rare,
Right.
but I'm not going to say that some don't. If in the old days, I'm dating myself, in the old days, we had just regular x-rays and not every veterinarian had a copier for x-rays. But most veterinarians would loan out the x-rays on a clear loan basis and loan them to the client for the purposes they need them for. And then the client is obliged to return them because they're part of our legal documentation that we have to retain. And I'm sure most pet parents know this, but veterinarians cannot give you the original records, but you are entitled to a copy of every document that we keep relative to your pet. And I believe in, as far as, and Anna could maybe correct me, I don't know, but I believe in every state, you're entitled to a copy of your records in a timely manner.
I think, yeah, that's also, I believe that to be true. Yeah.
I believe the holdup is the hidden secret is that I ask for records all the time, and sometimes it's just a matter of I want to review the records because I'm a homeopathic holistic veterinarian, and I haven't worked with the patient for the first 13 years or the first 6 or 5, and I want to know what's gone on in that timeline because that's critically important for me to better treat that particular animal. And even under those circumstances where there is no accusations or necessarily any known wrongdoing, etc., I will hear time and again, we'll ask the vet and the vet has to approve that and release the records. And why? I think the why is that they want to review those records and make sure that they look okay to them before they release them. How quickly they are able to get to that or not, I don't know. But then it begs the question, what are we afraid of? If we're not, willing to release the records. I also know that some veterinarians, and I don't think this should be done, and it certainly isn't good practice, will sometimes not even fill out their records for a day after, the appointment. That's particularly bad because, as brilliant as we may be, we forget stuff. So a matter of accuracy, I take records, at the time of the visit. I have, I think, the entire career that I've done, even surgery reports and things like that, but I don't do surgery anymore. And but I hear of that happening, and I've been in practices because I used to do relief work, which means I'd fill in at different practices. And it was amazing not only to see the lack of documentation, but, sometimes the vet's going, oh, I'll fill the surgery report tomorrow, or, it's late, I'm not going to do it tonight. And, I just thought, oh, gee, that, especially for a complicated surgery, we're not talking about necessarily a spay or a neuter. They're going to sit down and remember a, laparoscopic surgery. They opened the abdomen, did exploratory surgery or something. It's pretty complicated. So I can't answer to that, but I think that the holdup is the vet wants to review them or is worried about any kind of action and wants to make sure everything looks okay in those records. But pet parents deserve to be able to get their records in a very timely manner. And they are legal documents for the veterinarians, but they also belong to the client, not the originals, but a copy. They belong to the client. And any client that asks me for records, I'm kind of a one-person pony show, so it could take me a little bit longer. I do have 2 part-time assistants, and if they're here, I can ask them to copy the records. But you are entitled to a copy of your records, and I think it should be less than a week, no more than a week.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, and the hard part is none of these standards, the standards of care aren't really written down and solidified anywhere. They're just kind of what's generally accepted by the vets, and that's why you have to go to the vets. But that is something that comes up in almost every case is, what's in the records, the reality that it's important. The record keeping is extremely important. It's something we cover in almost every case because there's almost always something missing, from that. And if you think, somebody's going to, have trouble remembering it the next day, 2 years, or a year later when they're sued for it, it's going to be a lot harder, or maybe 2 to 3 years when they're deposed,
Right.
and then, it just kind of raises some credibility issues for veterinarians then that say, oh yeah, I remember it completely crystal clear. It's like, I doubt that.
Oh yeah, I don't even do veterinary medicine, and people will call me 2 days later and ask me a question about their dog, and I'm sorry, you got call me within the hour. I'm getting old. Call me since that time I've seen 80 dogs, so I'm like, I mean, I can remember the dog, but I can't remember the very specific stuff. They'll ask me, little tiny things like, how was he for his nails? I'm like, I don't know. So absolutely, it can fade very, very quickly.
Well, what I can't speak for other states, but I know for a fact in the state of Florida that appropriate record keeping is defined as, and I'm paraphrasing, as whatever the veterinarian thinks is pertinent for that particular visit. But the wrinkle in this, and I was in a snare on it. I actually wrote too much information down one time with the blood draw, and they didn't think that was sufficient. They didn't like WNL for within normal limits for heart rate and respiratory rate. However, I wasn't required to even do a physical exam before a blood draw, but I would never do a blood draw without doing a physical exam first. So, and they decided that wasn't sufficient record keeping. So if you think it's bad on both ends. And if it's that vague, that essentially means that the board can determine if you as a pet parent are looking for some kind of exoneration. The bar is super low in terms of record keeping, at least in the state of Florida. In other words, if the board decides that is sufficient record keeping, then they can just say so because it's just wide open. If it is up to the veterinarian at the time of the visit, for instance, if a pet comes in with a respiratory problem, and so we focus only on the respiratory system and don't mention anything else, that could be fine for record keeping, or the board could determine that it's not sufficient. Even though it seems as if it should be in the actual stated rules and laws and rules for veterinarians. It's really, so if you think it's difficulty navigating as a pet parent, it's difficulty navigating all the way across the board, whether you're a veterinarian, a pet parent, I don't know, just throw the coins up and see how they fall, because that's about how it's going to go with record keeping. Yeah, and so I don't think there's any incentive for veterinarians to keep better records, because it's almost as if nobody knows, like you're supposed to do a SOAP, SOAP. All of us are supposed to do that. But, you could just put one sentence for each one of those. And, then you've just filled out your subjective, objective assessment and plan. And you could just fill out just one sentence for, any of those. And then maybe that is sufficient. Who knows? It depends on who you're talking to. So, Anna, I don't even know how you wade through that.
Yeah, how would you
point out it's a little bit different for the boards, because the boards are very state specific, in the sense of whether they discipline a veterinarian or not based on or whether they determine a breach of standard of care. In the civil courts, it's a little different in that they kind of look at it as veterinarians are sort of trained on a national level, in the sense that you look at the AVMA, you look at various guidelines, it's assumed that wherever the vets go to school, they get the training, and that training is going to be somewhat uniform, throughout the United States at least, and probably some other areas as well. But in civil courts, we look at the standard of care kind of more broadly, and it's really a basis where the other veterinarians come in and decide, well, the standard of care for this would be X, Y, and Z for this particular kind of procedure. And if you're like an AAHA hospital or something that's accredited, you can also take a look at those accreditations and see if that provides a kind of a standard of care. But generally speaking, in the civil courts, they kind of look more broadly at what's reasonable in this situation. So if there may be a state, even in the states that are their boards themselves may be a bit more lax, it may be treated, depending on, how the states are going to look at that, how, the juries, the experts are going to look at that, what that standard of care is going to be. And it could be a little bit more stringent, and we've seen that more so in some of the more recent cases where, you see a lot of dentals and there's just no charting at all. It's like, well, wait a minute, you didn't even note here. So you can't decide what kind of grade of periodontal disease there were or anything,
Right.
and we found some problems, with veterinarians that are doing extractions, without having taken x-rays. I mean, that's per se malpractice according to the literature and in the articles that are written. So sometimes, you just remember that in the civil cases, it's a little different than the boards, because the boards are really, each state has their own board of of veterinarians and others that they may appoint to govern this, but it may be a bit different, in the civil courtrooms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's one of the things we talk about with the boards, right, Scott? Like we need to dismantle our veterinary boards and then come up with a standard of veterinary boards that are doing a little bit better job of looking at what the standard of care is and raising it up, because they're the level that they agree is okay seems so beneath what we should do. I know we had a attorney on here one time and said that the standard of care, and Scott, Dr. Canizero, I think you were the vet at that time, he said that human standard of care is whatever 3 other doctors would consider, but with veterinarians, I think he said it was you had to have 5 vets that agreed. Does that sound right? It was lower. It was lower for veterinarians. Or no, you had to have 3 for vets, but you had to have 5 people for humans. So if you could just get 3 veterinarians, that's what I would do.
Toasters. Considering your pets are considered toasters or purses, that would certainly make sense to me that the bar would be lower, or that fewer veterinarians would have to agree. Yeah, that would make sense. As that is.
Yeah. Dr. Canizero, real quick, can you define what SOAP is? What is that?
Those are called SOAP notes, and we're taught in veterinary school that we have to have a format for our notes, which S stands for subjective. So that means, subjectively, what's going on with the pet? What does the client have to say about what's going on with the pet? Objective is our physical exam findings and our vital signs and all that. Assessment is our assessment of the patient. That could include things like how well do they seem to be? Do they seem weak or lethargic? Or what are our differential diagnoses? What are we suspecting is going on with the pet? And P is for plan. Your plan and treatment, that has to do with your plan and your treatment. What's the plan? Are we going to do some blood work, x-rays, surgery? And what treatments are we going to be rendering to the pet? And all veterinarians are supposed to, if we are physically going to examine a pet, include our notes in that format. And the boards are going to be looking for that. I can't speak for civil court, but the boards will be looking for that. I would presume that the civil courts would educate themselves and be looking for that as well.
So that question came across from Molly. Molly, thank you for helping us make sure we clarify that. I missed that and should have.
I breezed through it really quickly. So the first time I breezed through it quickly, realizing that people probably didn't know what SOAP notes were.
Oh, I didn't know in my first deposition. I found out the first time deposing. I'm like, "What's this SOAP stuff?" What had a quick
what's it about SOAP? What's up with that?
Like, what does this mean?
But this is really an interesting. This is going to kind of bounce over to you, Anna. When and like Dr. Canizero had said, when you're going through all of this stuff, that is something you're probably also looking for. Did they list this stuff exactly like you had mentioned it? And Anna, is that something that you would be able to go after a veterinarian for? If it's supposed to be the way that they're doing their notes and they're not doing it, I know sometimes we have to do a little roundabout to get to the point that our animals aren't getting standard of care. But are these little things that you guys have to kind of, I hate to say trick, but what is it like?
Well, it's sort of like you're just chipping away at whether they did a good job or not, because one of the biggest problems you have is when the notes, there's omissions, the sins of omission, because they're taught. I mean, it's something taught, and every single veterinarian I've ever deposed, I've asked these questions, like what is the importance of veterinary records, and it's always to ensure proper treatment, to see that you can see what happened before, and you can plan out better progress for the animal in the future. But when they don't take good notes, when there isn't something in there, it's impossible to tell. And that, you bring that up and you say, well, isn't it a standard of care to keep notes? And yes, it is. And so you basically you're establishing that, okay, well, you fell below the standard of care. But remember, there's two components, you have to have the, breach of the standard of care. And but for that breach, there would not have been injury. So a lot of times, failing to keep proper records is not, it's a big deal. But there may be something else in the notes, like usually the lab tests, that show like, wow, you missed this kidney disease for how many years, that kind of thing that comes out. Or you gave, a particular drug that you weren't supposed to give. Those are usually more at the forefront. But yeah, it comes up that the records have not been properly kept, and that it just goes more towards, the credibility or the force of the whatever particular veterinarian's testimony that they did nothing wrong. And kind of chipping away at that.
I'd like to add, because I think it'll be important for your listeners, when you are asking for medical records, particularly from a specialty clinic, or if your pet has been hospitalized, make sure that you specify that you want all of the doctor notes, including any and all lab test results and the treatment sheets. Mm-hmm. The treatment sheets are so often missing. And I think I reviewed a case one time where the pet was sent home. And I wrote a letter for this individual. The pet was sent home, and just hours before, the temperature was too low. And that is critically dangerous. And I think they even failed to sort of check the temperature again enough times, in my opinion, after that low body temperature. It's one thing to have a fever, but when a pet has a below normal body temperature, that could indicate that the patient's in big trouble. And this pet did pass away at home. And I think had it not been for monitoring that and determining maybe this pet shouldn't have gone home at that time because maybe the body temperature wasn't stable enough, I'm missing something, I should be looking for something. Had I not seen the treatment sheets to see that body temperature had dropped low, we just would have had some records that had absolutely no mention of that. Because the technicians are typically the ones that are writing down all the monitoring and whatnot. There could have been a failure of communication, but at the end of the day, the veterinarian is responsible for reviewing that information to determine if the pet is well enough to go home. And if they have not reviewed that, I believe that to be below standard of care. Make sure you get everything, including the treatment sheets, because that could make the difference that makes the difference.
Yeah, that's hugely important, because we had a case where there was like an animal that hadn't urinated in something like 20 plus hours, yet they were being given IV fluids, things like that. It's like, wow, wait a minute, how could you miss this? And so it's the boarding. They told them treatment sheets. Yeah, treatment sheets, boarding sheets. But one other thing that the veterinarians have been very reluctant to give are the drugs, the drug logs for controlled substances. Now, we ask for them because in one case, we actually found an overdose like 3 times what it was supposed to be. But they did not want to give those up. And they said, well, we're not going to. And you're like, but why?
Why? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's just a fight. And we'll get into that when we go through like some of the litigation stuff. But those motions where they hide or they won't give you information without going through the courts is what drives the costs up. And sometimes it's calculated. Sometimes it's on purpose. Like they know there's something in the records they don't want to give you. And, you're just not going to get it until you go fight for it. And that's a huge issue where you're not going to get attorney's fees back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have so many questions coming in real quick though. Dr. Canizero, can you tell us what the normal temperature is for a dog and a cat?
Sure. The normal body temperature should be in the range of not below 99, and that's on the low side, and not above 102.5. And a dangerous fever would be anything over 105. 105 is borderline, but at 106 or above, you could be at risk where the pet could begin to have seizures, and there could be significant organ damage to the pet. So I always recommend to my clients, go to the regular drugstore, just get the inexpensive digital thermometers, the ones that have the flexible tip, get some lubricant, and get used to taking temperatures on your pets, because I like to teach my clients to do vital signs at home, because it will give you a lot of information for should I rush to the emergency clinic, or if my pet comes home after surgery or anesthesia, and they really seem more lethargic than I expect. I can't tell you how many of these cases with Joey's legacy that I keep getting that the veterinarian says, "Oh, don't worry about it. They'll be feeling better in a few minutes," and the pet passes away. So I don't remember that when I used to do surgical procedures. If anybody ever called me and the pet wasn't quite right, I took that really seriously. They just had a major procedure. When we do anesthesia on a pet, they lose their ability to thermoregulate, to regulate their body temperature. And it also can compromise internal organs, because even if they're on intravenous fluid therapy, they still can get damage or compromise to the internal organs. It's not the same as being awake and perfusing blood and oxygen through all the tissues. There's no question, we all know that as veterinarians, that there can be compromise, even though we're providing oxygen and anesthesia and IV fluids. And that is why anesthesia can be so dangerous, because we can have adverse reactions, which are either allergic reactions. We could have accidental overdoses where, you thought that they needed more and they didn't, or they whatever. I mean, there could be mistakes made. There could be technicians monitoring. No offense. Some technicians are incredibly talented with monitoring anesthesia, but generally speaking, should be a veterinarian doing that. And at least, on board paying close attention. So get used to checking the vital signs. Get used to the color of your pet's gum color. What's the gum and tongue usually look like? Particularly the gums, because the tongue will change color based on panting, or or diet will change the tongue to a paler color if they're on a poor diet, for example. But the gum color should be a peachy pink color. They shouldn't be dry and sticky. They should be moist. And if you put your finger on the gum, then the color should come right back within 2 seconds or less. If it's longer than that, that could indicate something serious. And check the body temperature. And if you get adept enough, pay attention to their breathing and even their heart rate. If you want to touch the chest and try to find the heartbeat, if you don't have a very overweight pet, not trying to offend anybody, but as long as you don't have a very overweight pet, you'd be able to do that. But you can count the respiratory rate, how many times either the chest goes out or goes in. Choose one or the other in 15 seconds and multiply that number times 4, and that is breaths per minute. So get used to what you should be seeing, and that'll go a long way for you to really have a general idea and protect yourself and your pet, especially if the veterinarians are not going to be as responsive to you, which I absolutely think they should be with major procedures. And I would even call like a spay or a neuter a major procedure. It's an anesthetic event. Any anesthetic event. Make sure your pet is alert and has good vital signs when they are returned to you, or they shouldn't have come home.
Thank you. I told you guys, this isn't about just, it's really about us helping you with your animals. That's why I want to make sure when we're talking about temperatures and teaching people both sides of this, what do we do when it happens and how do we do to avoid it? So if we know our pet's vital signs before we end up in an emergency room with a veterinarian who may not ever have met your dog, and they come to you and say, oh my gosh, his temperature's 101, you can say his temperature's always 101. Or it's always 99. So that's why I wanted to clarify that. Scott, the next question, I'm going to direct it to you because I know you are going to be able to blow this question out of the water. It comes from Thomas Clark, and he would like to know if veterinarians can lie and falsify their records.
Oh, I've heard 1 or 2 cases to that effect. So I'll give you a personal experience with that. 7 days after Joey died, I returned to the animal hospital and requested his records. The girl at the front desk printed them and handed them to me without question. Proceeded with the complaint against the state of Florida. Filed a complaint with the state of Florida against the vet. They notified him that a complaint was filed. Please send us the records from this case. And when Joey's attorney received the records, compared them to what I had given him originally, he said, guess what? And he noted some of the differences, and it was stark. There were stark differences. All of a sudden, I became an inappropriate caregiver an inappropriate pet parent. I failed to have Joey undergo certain tests that they recommended. All, of course, none of it's true. Didn't pay my bills on time, paid the bill every time I went in full. They originally told me Joey had a lipoma, benign fatty tumor on his tail. They said, well, we don't normally remove these unless it affects the dog's lifestyle. Like if it was interfering with his walking or something like that, they'd remove it. Otherwise, they don't remove lipomas. On the altered records, it said that they suggested strongly that they remove the lipoma, and I refused to have it removed. Left was right, up was down, black was white. And so, I guess to answer your question, Carrie, if it happened to me, maybe it happened to one other person,
Yeah. Well, it's not just about blatant lies, but Anna, this is probably you're going to be able to help us explain how an attorney would take this and go, well, in this one, he was a very compliant client and he did everything he was supposed to do. And in this one, he wasn't compliant. So it's not that the vet necessarily lied about what procedures were done. It's where you start to go, I think we have somebody trying to hide something.
Oh, yeah. Right? I mean, the way the records, that's why, every time you go to the vet, you get the records every time, because they, it's usually when somebody suspects there's going to be litigation that these changes get made. But one of the other areas, and this is probably something for the other attorneys that appear too, is that, when there are those dual tracks, like when there's an IDF or where there's a disciplinary complaint filed at the same time a civil lawsuit is brought, a lot of times they, the attorneys that are defending will fight tooth and nail to prevent you from getting any information about what was submitted to the disciplinary board. We found out in one case where we actually did subpoena those records, and I guess maybe the attorney just didn't see at that time or whatever. It went kind of past them, and we got the records. What we found was there was a veterinarian who had sent very different responses to the IDFPR than that had been provided in the complaint, in the responses to the complaint that we filed, and that was a huge red flag. But it's a fight every time, because there are a lot of protections for somebody whose information has been submitted as a complaint to the disciplinary body. And part of that is because these bodies want to make sure that the veterinarian is not being wrongfully accused, because you don't want all this information out if somebody's just got a maybe angry about the price they had to pay and then they make up a complaint. That's why they try to protect the vet until they find out something for real. But the hardest part was seeing that this was very different than what the answers we had received, and realizing that this was probably going on in a number of cases that we were simply not able to get them, because getting that subpoena issued depended on the judge in the case and, whether the judge would allow it or not. Wow. And, clearly it's relevant. The information is clearly relevant. So why it would be denied is a question mark to me. But, I stand ready to answer your other legal questions.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. So let's start talking about the different types of courts, right? We have small claims court. If you can kind of define for us what options are available to people as far as the court systems.
Sure. And I want to caveat this is that, again, every state's different. That's why you got to check with the attorneys in your state for what is available and what's not. But I had gotten a question early from Scott to make sure we covered this. Yeah. Because people ask a lot about one of them being mediation. Now, mediation is not necessarily something in the court system. A court may ask you to go to mediation or may order you to go to mediation, but you can do that at the outset. You can say, I'd like to try alternative dispute resolution. And that's basically what it is. It's typically something you pay for, although there are some free services. There not many, but you usually will pay a person, usually one person. They may or may not be an attorney, but their job is to try to resolve the dispute. And there, the costs, again, can vary, usually $300 to $500 an hour. Typically, people will split the cost of getting a mediator. And you basically decide whether you want the mediation to be binding or non-binding. Binding meaning that you guys go to that mediation, you are going to get, a settlement or some kind of resolution. A lot of times that's not recommended because you don't know the mediator, you don't know how it's going to turn out. But you can do a non-binding mediation and try to find out what the other side's, concerns are and what your concerns are. See if you can find a place in the middle. The issues that come up in mediation a lot of times are that a lot of times in the settlement agreement, somebody may want it to be all confidential because mediation is private versus like going to the court system. That's going to be public. The filings are public. Anybody can see them, unless it's specifically ordered, they can't, which would be rare in a professional malpractice case. But you may ask you to remain quiet about this. I mean, we've had people go, or even veterinarians involved in mediation go so far as to say they didn't want you to talk about the case ever or the animal ever. And it's like, well, wait a minute, you can't do that because these people are grieving. This animal was part of their life. It's like you can't say, well, you can never talk about Fluffy again, period. And if you do, we're going to sue you and we're going to get attorney's fees. So you have to be somewhat careful about these agreements. They also a lot of times will ask for a non-disparagement, meaning you can never say anything bad about this clinic or this doctor ever again. And it's like, well, do you really want to give that right away? I mean, that's a big question. So just watch out, for confidentiality. Usually confidentiality and the price they pay, who cares? It's not that big of a deal. But some people do, and they don't want that in there. And that's probably why the damages are held lower, than they should be, because people are not made aware of what settlements are going at. But then there's also small claims. So in some of the states that you can't get any kind of enhanced damages, like maybe Texas or somewhere, I don't speak for all of Texas, but just, kind of an overview of looking at things. You may have to go to a small claims, where it's typically $10,000 or under. You might be able to get the costs back for a botched surgery. There's usually no discovery, meaning that you go in, you have your expert, you have your report. They maybe have somebody and they're expert, their person, and that's it. You get a complaint, you get, if you're the defense, you're only going to see that complaint. You're not going to get more discovery unless the court specifically allows it. It's meant to give you a more cost-effective means to get to court, and to get all the way through to a trial. And it's more often than not a bench trial, meaning a judge versus a jury. But the damages are lower. It's meant to make it a faster process. It is a public forum, so whatever happens, can be made public. You're not going to be held to confidentiality. You're not going to be held to a non-disparagement. If you didn't like what happened there, you can go out and say, it's my opinion. I don't like that place. I wouldn't use those services. That said, there's also, a lot of people talk about demand letters. So, and what that is it's a private negotiation that you're going to be having with usually the insurance company, for the veterinarian. And there, Dr. Canizero is probably very familiar with being asked for a letter. And really all that is you kind of giving them a heads up, of like, hey, if you don't want to settle this, I'm going to take it to court and here's my expert letter. A lot of times people try to do this to, again, avoid the cost of having to go through litigation. And, it also gives the veterinarian and their insurance carrier an opportunity to handle it outside of a public forum. But the demand letter really, the success of it depends on the insurance company. And there's one in particular that I will not mention, but it's pretty useless. You might as well take the demand letter and just put it onto the complaint and file it. And that's it. Because like we've tried, it's a waste of money, a waste of time and effort to try to negotiate with them. And that's just their reputation. So you have to kind of find out who you're dealing with in the insurance company. And that's usually quick. You'll find out right away. You can use an attorney to do these negotiations. Sometimes they can serve as shadow counsel. Like, so you don't want them to know you have an attorney, but you have an attorney that you're asking questions. And that's fine too. Because
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but in small claims court, you can still get an attorney's advice. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, absolutely. You can appear either on your own, pro se, representing yourself, or you can have an attorney represent you. Now, the other side is more likely than not going to have an attorney. And it's not even just because it's like a vet you sue, but usually it's because of if you sue a vet hospital, they're a corporate structure. And typically corporate structures have to be represented by somebody else. Again, state laws may vary, but here in Illinois, if you're a corporation, you're an LLC, you can't represent yourself because there could be a conflict of interest. Like if you're the director and they're like, well, I don't really care if the company has to pay for this. They want somebody who's protecting the company or the LLC. But yeah, you can do it. You can have an attorney come in, and that's, a way you can have the attorney come in just for trial. You can have an attorney help you draft a complaint. But yeah, it's just meant to give you a quicker, less expensive process, to get to all the way to trial to get a resolution. Because, all these things, the courts, they may not be always fair. They may not always be the best or fastest way, but they do what they say. They do resolve disputes in one way or the other. But, the demand letter, back to that one, is just like the settlement. You're trying to settle separately. Again, it may or may not be successful. And that's, that really depends. It's typically you're going to get lowball offers. They're going to seek confidentiality, non-disparagement clauses, all those types of things. So you just kind of have to weigh out whether you're okay with not talking about this ever again. The other ones, the full-fledged lawsuits, that's where you're looking at kind of going in, asking for higher damages. We sometimes see this in cases where an animal that's lost was maybe an emotional support animal, or may have been a service animal, or something, what I think, personally, I think the damages should be far higher than they are. And it's not just coming from a law perspective, being a lawyer, the typical greedy attorney. It's more that unless there is an actual consequence for doing something wrong, there's not going to be any changes in the standards of care. There has to be a consequence. And a lot of times, especially with the corporate buyouts of a lot of these veterinary offices, corporations typically only understand money damages. And when the damages are low, they're not going to do anything to change, business as usual. It has to be a higher damage. So we typically will push for that, not just showing that the animals they have they're sentient beings. They have thoughts, feelings, desires beyond what we would attribute to them. They have value to us as part of our family. And some of the courts are picking up on that. They are. There's differences between actual valuation and market value. Market valuation is what you can't get $1,000 for your toaster because if you break it, you can buy a new one for $20. And that was, that's kind of the old thinking in animals. And sadly, that's kind of like what some of the veterinary associations still promote. Not every veterinarian, but a lot of the veterinary associations didn't even want people to use the word companion animal because of that very reason. But what we also, when you're facing or you're in a state where there's market value, you can still argue, hey, the cost, if you want this exact animal, this exact dog, you would have to clone this dog, and that would cost $50,000. So, you can make these arguments. You can be, you can use a creative approach to arguing these cases. Whether they're success or not, is going to depend on your court, going to depend on your judge, your jury, whoever you're in front of. But the problem with the full-fledged lawsuits is that it's very rare. Even if you're, dealing with some kind of fraud, unless it's a statutory damage or an intentional act, you're not likely to get attorney's fees back. So the other side is aware of that, and they can try to drive the costs up to, make you go through discovery motions, make you try really hard to get information that, should just naturally be given in the process of a lawsuit. So they can be very expensive. And the hard part is that you may be at the end of the case and you may break even, or you may not. Or you just don't know.
Molly had asked, have you seen some cases coming out of small claims court? Are people winning these cases?
People, yeah, they have been winning. Like one of the more recent ones was a vet during the pandemic. They sent their tech out to take the dog from the car to the hospital, and the tech didn't put a slip lead on, and so the dog got out and got hit by a car and killed. So of course they sued. Unfortunately, in that case, it was one of kind of the collar counties, and they didn't give heightened damages. They only gave like in the thousands, like the lower thousands, but it was still holding them accountable at least,
Why did they even, my question is why, I feel like if my staff did that, you wouldn't have to sue me. I would be like, unless you were, I just feel like you wouldn't have to sue me. I'd have to be like, what do I do to make this right? Like, I don't,
right.
I know the tech wasn't like, oh, I don't care about this dog. And I know it was one of those kind of negligent things, but it still was completely that person's fault. Those are the things that bother me, is sometimes I just feel like we shouldn't have to go to court. We can just say we messed up and what do we do to make it right? And
and a lot of really reputable businesses do that. That's why they seek settlement. It's really dependent on the insurance company, but even with an insurance company, the vet or the vet office can be approached to say, do you want to independently settle this? Because they can. And with the veterinary office where the dog, was killed like that, the press, like the person can talk about it forever. They can post it on every review board. Like they can go, that's the fifth element that nobody really mentioned was social media, which is kind of where people are going when they're not getting justice in the courts. And a lot of times, and you have to be careful because there's always defamation that you got to watch out for. Like you can say somebody's really ugly and you don't like them, but you can't say that they're incompetent in their profession or, a very list of categories in all the states, of what is defamatory per se. But you can stick to the facts and say, here's what happened to me. Here's my records. You can paint it all out there. And we've had cases settle just to get people to remove that information because they know how, a lot of these offices know how damaging it is. And, even the case where, like that was a particularly low, I thought, and the reason I think it was low is because the person had purchased that dog. And they decided, oh, well, since you purchased, instead of like adopted or did something else, it was like, oh, well, that's the value. So you can just get another. And it was very difficult to get through to this particular judge. It was out, and again, in a farther out county, but to get them to understand this, whereas, first and fourth districts, here, actual valuation has, a better understood meaning to be that, obviously my animal means more to me than it does to the person who hurt them.
So are you saying that the purchasing of the dog made it become the argument for it being property versus had they gone and adopted? It would have
kind
been
of. It was a strange situation because the judge was looking at this and saying, well, the judge analyzed this and kind of said, well, this person purchased a dog and then they purchased a replacement dog. And it was just like, well, wait a minute. Do you say that to somebody who has a kid?
I adopted at the animal shelter and I still had to pay for it. But I can't get it. You can't. I don't, unless I found one running around on the streets. I don't think you can get a free dog anymore.
Yeah, I would hope not. Because usually they don't end up in very good places. But like adoptions, you see the free Craigslist stuff. It's usually bad. But that judge, her reasoning was just, I think she just couldn't wrap her head around the fact that animals mean so much more, and that the concept of actual valuation would still apply regardless of whether an animal was purchased or was a pedigree or whatnot. It was very, very strange, but usually, in the other counties, we've gotten better, results, going to trial. And sometimes you go to trial and you'll lose, you just don't know. I mean, in any litigation, your chances are probably never going to be better than 50-50 because there's so many moving parts. It's very scary. So, if you are able to do mediation, if you are able to do, a demand letter, if you are able to do something where you can reach a settlement that isn't onerous, that doesn't have a non-disparagement or something like that, it's usually a good route. But I think the real change is only going to come when enough of these cases are in the courts and the courts become familiar with them and it's pushed and the word gets out that, hey, here's how the courts are treating the cases. A lot of people will be appalled to see that the dollar valuations are so low. And I think that's where it's going to change. It's got to change from public opinion first, and then it will seep into the courts. And that's where, these organizations come in so handy, or not handy, but, like they're critical, the importance of getting that out there, because that is the number one thing when people call, they're upset to learn that, wait a minute, why would my damages in any way be less, than for another family member? And the courts don't automatically look at like emotional damages. They look at, the cost of the botched procedure. They look at that, okay, well, let's see, what was the actual valuation in the terms of like, okay, yes, this animal meant more to you, but we're not going to give you like what you would have gotten for the loss of your sister or brother or something like that. And the sad fact is that, a lot of these animals are closer, their bond with that person. That may be the only being in that person's life, especially if they're older. They may have, spouses that have died. That's their connection, and it's not simply replaceable, because when someone reaches a certain age, they don't want to get another dog. They're afraid their dog will outlive them. They're afraid of things. And it's very, very difficult, to convey that sometimes to a court who may not understand, who may not have ever had an animal, in their life.
So
I'd like to add that I think there was a study actually done that it was a study regarding psychological effects of losing a pet. This is regardless of even negligence. And it was actually shown that the loss of a fur family member actually was more traumatic to people than the loss of a
Yeah.
two-legged family member. And I don't think that could be understated. And the relationship and the bond that occurs, I don't care if you have a bird or a snake or a guinea pig or a dog, a cat, a horse, that bond and that relationship, and I don't want to offend anybody's spouses or my own either, sometimes honestly is a bigger deal. And I think probably most all of us here would probably say that, but careful, hopefully our spouses aren't watching. And hopefully they don't know. There's much to be said about that, but I guess the courts don't recognize that, Anna, at all.
Yeah, it's because of that basis in property law, and because like the normal, like in a property case, like they're used to seeing a car crash, and so if your car is crashed and you know it's damaged, and let's say it's like an old Civic and it's worth maybe $5,000, you can't. But to repair that car, it would cost $13,000. The court is not going to give you $13,000. They're going to say, here's $5,000 to get that same car that you could get. But what they're missing is that the animals are not fungible. They are not simply replaceable. They are very unique, and that bond is real. And I think the devaluation of the human to companion animal bond, and I mean valuation in the money sense of the businesses that are behind all of this, that's the biggest fraud in the industry. Because like, you know, again, paying $10,000 to bring, you know, to get, you know, Tuxie's pinky paw fixed or something like that, you know, I'm willingly going to pay that. I wouldn't pay that, you know, for my car. I'd be like, fine, trash it. I don't care. You know, it's car. You know, but it's very different.
I love my Subaru, Anna.
People say
not
that.
Not as much as my four-leggeds, but I love my Outback.
But yeah, but you draw the analogies. You try to you know, open their eyes to like, okay, in a fire, what are you going to bring? Are you going to bring your dog, or are you going to go grab, you know, a fistful of cash? I mean, of course you're going to bring.
That's such a great analogy.
Yeah, it really
And anybody who isn't going to grab their dog doesn't deserve one. Like
Right.
if you're going to grab your cash over your dog, you are not an animal lover.
Right.
But you're exactly right. If there's a fire in my house, the first thing I grab, because my husband's already outside,
Right.
my dog and my cats.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, I mean, people have
Been
expressed
married 25 years. I'm smart.
you know, but yeah, there have been people that expressed, you know, like shame and their fear that because they felt worse, you know, they felt more grief and more sadness for the loss of their companion animal than even sometimes their parents or some, you know, another relative. You have to understand that bond is absolutely real, and it has a dollar value, because if it didn't, none of these clinics would exist. You know, there is no veterinarian for my toaster. That does not exist, you know, and there's a reason for that. And that's where like the courts, it's almost like a machismo, like a toxic kind of like, oh, well, you know, you must be something wrong with you if you care that much about your animal. It's like, well, me and, you know, the other, you know, millions of people that have created this $99 billion a year industry. So no, you know, it's just the courts catching up to reality. And really, the courts are almost always the last to the party, the last ones to realize that this is
We're getting
in fact
in there.
reality.
Each little tiny win. And even if I say this, even if you go to small claims court, you choose small claims court and you go and you lose, there is still a good chance that the judge, who is a human person and hopefully an animal lover, may think, gosh, I wish I could have, but the law wouldn't let me. But then they start to think, and little by little, we plug away. Even when we lose, we plug away at change. And that's why collectively we have to be willing to say, and to me, small claims court doesn't cost, there's not this huge cost involved in it. So it's worth trying, I think, absolutely. If we can't afford huge attorney fees and being, you know, it dragging out for years sometimes in these horrible cases that happen, I think it's worth trying. I have a question from Molly. She wants to know, why can't you say they breached the standard of care if you have an opinion letter stating this? This equates to incompetence. No?
Well, oh no, I probably should clarify. And again, every state is different on their defamation laws, but you can talk about the facts. You can you can talk about like, this is what it says they breached the standard of care. But you get into some kind of gray areas in the law and areas you don't want to really go to, where defamation sort of, and again, if it's true, if they are incompetent, you can certainly talk about it. You can certainly say that. But if it's, there's certain areas like if you are, the ability to perform your job, sexually transmitted diseases, if somebody has that, whether they've committed a crime. These things, if you start spouting about on social media and it turns out they're not true, those are things that are defamation per se, meaning that they don't even have to prove damages. You're just gonna, if that's not true, you're gonna be found, yep, that's defamation. But a lot of times, if people are just posting the facts, people can read those and come up with their conclusions. If it says here, Dr. X cut the wrong leg off of a cancer patient dog, I think pretty much anybody who reads that is going to figure out for themselves that that's incompetence. But if you stated that as fact and that's the true fact, that's fine. That's what happened. And it's kind of like just letting people, you can let people know what happened, but there's certain things you kind of want to watch out for in the statements. And that's where social media gets a little tricky. But I will say it has been a huge benefit to animals, because it has allowed people to talk about these issues in a public forum, items of, public concerns where there are some protections to that kind of thing, and just put the facts out there of here's what happened. You just have to be very careful that you're saying things that are actual provable. They're either that it's pure opinion, which is very scary too. You can't just say it's my opinion that person is incompetent. That doesn't count. That still counts as, something bad, but in a lot of situations, but you can say, here's what happened to me and here's what's in my records. Here's what I have. And when you say those kinds of things, that it is damaging. I mean, we've had very scary cases. I can't tell you how many cases now I've had where a veterinarian has botched a spay surgery. I mean, it was a neuter surgery in a very bad way. So, just things that have happened that led to lifelong problems for the animals, that just putting the facts out there are enough. And something that you can't do necessarily if you have a settlement agreement of non-disparagement. So
I know behind the scenes, the board of Joey's Legacy, we've talked about keeping databases and keeping information and stuff for the purpose of helping anybody who's a member of Joey's Legacy. If a case is won in small claims court, mm-hmm. and another person, because Dr. Canizero can probably attest to this, a lot of these are the same problems, right? Gave too much anesthesia, didn't monitor things correctly, gave the wrong medications. Like a lot of the stuff that we see tends to be very similar cases from case to case. Mm-hmm. So if I were to take a case into small claims court and I was to win, could that case be used for someone else's small claims court evidence? If we were to keep that database going?
Well, it's helpful for somewhat persuasive, but a lot of times judges will, they'll look at another trial court judge and say, oh, well, that's just another trial court judge. They generally look at it in terms of like precedents. Like they'll look at the appellate court above them, or the Supreme Court above them, or the Supreme Court of the United States above that. But I say this because we're in a very interesting area, because animal law, it's a moving target. It is changing. And even though like you heard it probably a lot in current, media about how, we got to stick to precedent, or here's this and that. But what's interesting is precedent, it is, you follow these general guidelines of the law, but it does change with public sentiment. Like there were times, like there are changes in the law, like, who can marry who. These things change when people, have kind of come to, accept like, okay, this is how our society works. The same is happening, and it should be happening, with animal law, as people come to realize like, okay, animals are they're our companions, and, there is a valuation in these bonds, and that has to be recognized. So when you start getting more of these judgments, you certainly can point to the courts and say, well, in these other cases, here's what has happened, and here's what, someone used as evidence. You can use it for persuasion to tell the judge, absolutely, here's what they did, and here's what we looked at. And you can also, sometimes if there's any other opinions of experts, that are filed in cases and made publicly available, you can certainly use those to help, assist in forming these breaches, the standards of care and what's accepted and what's not. But, but when you look at it, it's not hard and fast rule that animals are property, period. That's it. It'll never change. No, that can change, even though there may be case law out there that's very bad, because maybe that case law is from 100 years ago. And
Right.
that's not the way it works now. And that's
Right.
the beauty of the system in common law. Things can change, and they should change because our society changes. But, you hear a lot of judges say, well, it's precedent. This is how we have to do it. It's like, no. And if you look at it from a different legal angle, you certainly can make that change. It's just, making those arguments. So yeah, a database that has like these awards and things like that, can be helpful. And a lot of times in settlements, it's something that people will use. They go to like jury verdict reporters or settlement reporters, so things like that. So yeah, it would be great to have a database, with that information, because it would definitely help. And I talked too much. I got to turn it back over to Dr. Canizero, who's got some really good information.
It's just something that we're, behind the scenes trying to figure out how do we, there's so much we got to do, and we got to win more cases in order to get further along. Thomas had a question. If he's had a case going through small claims court and realizes he's got a lot of evidence, can he cancel his small claims court and go to the next level? Or is that going to look bad?
Well, you can try, because sometimes you can file a case in like a higher division of court, like saying like, I'm going to ask for the sun, moon, and the sky, and the judge will send you down to a lower court to say like, no, you can't prove those damages, which I think is usually unfair, but it happens. But yeah, you can try to move up if you find something in the records that say like, oh my gosh, this doctor totally lied. This is fraud, and maybe we can get punitive damages and things. Then yeah, you can petition the court to be reassigned to a different division, to maybe like a law division case instead of a small claims case, just because of something that you may have found. But it's going to be hard in small claims because you don't really have discovery. It usually happens in like municipal case, like a case that's in a different bracket. So like if there's under 10,000, then there's usually like above that up to a certain number, like maybe 50 or 100,000. And then above that number would be a different division. But you can petition to move within the divisions if you have reason to do so. Like if you find fraud that you didn't know about at the time you filed the case, you absolutely can bring that to the court's attention and say, look, this is going to, if I'm able to prove this, I absolutely am going to be entitled to more damages.
So are there any downsides?
Dependent on every state. So
right. But are there any downsides to going to small claims court, or can you tell us what they are? I know there are some, but can you tell us one of the questions is what would those downsides be to going to small claims court?
It's usually that you're going to be limited in whatever those damages are. So if you go to a small claims court for 10,000, then that's all you can ask for. And a lot of times it's an insult, to have lost your animal and say, well, $10,000. Because honestly, you asked me to put a price on Tuxie, like a zillion dollars. I don't have a price for that, and so going to the automatic lowest court it's an insult to someone who's already lost their animal to seemingly have to go there. But it's certainly not, if there isn't the money to go to a higher court or even try to, and it's not to say if you went to a higher court, they might send you to a lower court, but it's still something that it's just hard for somebody to come to terms with, like, okay, I'm only going to ask for this much, because it isn't an accurate reflection of that value to that person. But it certainly is, the downside is the limitation on damages. The upside is it's going to be less expensive to bring that case. And you may have an element of surprise. They don't know what you're going to say other than what you put in your complaint. They don't know how great your expert's going to be at testifying.
Can you talk a little bit about these are some questions that came up before about she says the full-fledged lawsuit, specific categories that can be claimed for damages. For example, cost of pet cremation, vet bills, emotional distress. And if some states pets are in some cases, are there any states where pets are considered sentimental property.
Well, yeah, and it's sentimental property is kind of, that's an odd one because it's something that people usually ask for damages for, like if there was an heirloom or a photo, that like the photo of my great great Aunt Tilly, that's going to be something important to me, but I can bet nobody else on this round table is going to put much value on that. But to me, it's important, and so that's where the concept of sentimental value came up. But the problem with sentimental value is, that wasn't a living being. That was, that picture never gave me love, never came up and sat with me and at night and never comforted me when I was crying, whereas your companion animal does. So it's not a fair comparison, but it's one that the courts have sometimes used because they don't know what to do. They're like, okay, well, obviously this is a different kind of property, I just don't know what kind of property. But again, this is highly state dependent, and so that's why it's very hard to comment on this, because in Illinois, at least in certain of the divisions, you can get actual valuation. It's just that it's going to usually be a lot less than you would get for the loss of a human. So that there is an element of an emotion. It's an emotional element, but it's not the kind of emotional loss like the grief and the mental distress, which they don't usually award, which they should. And actually, I don't really know why, other than the property designation, that the courts would put that arbitrary limitation on. And so it's something we challenge in every case. But generally speaking, yeah, you can get the cremation. You can ask for the cremation costs. You can ask for the costs of the botched procedure. Sometimes we try to establish actual valuation by showing how much somebody has paid for the whole life of the animal. But sometimes courts will disregard that because they'll treat it as, well, it's like your car, taking your car in to get an oil change. You don't get every oil change, if you bang up the car, because, that's part of what tit for tat, using the car and having it, but as far as, those, yeah, the standard, maybe if you lost wages, you had to, take care of your animal instead of, going to work. Those kinds of costs come up. But usually in states where, like if it's just market valuation, then we usually try to, we would urge people to maybe get the cells frozen so that you could potentially, not that you may want to clone the dog or the cat, but maybe if you chose to, you could. So, maybe preserve those cells and make it a possibility. Make it there to say, like, is there a possibility of cloning? Absolutely. And I have those cells preserved. So, because the cost of preserving is usually, $200 to $400. It's not that terribly expensive. And it then gives you an opportunity then to argue those market valuation or those market theories of cloning if you wanted. Now, yeah. I have yet to see a court actually award that in a case, anything that I've handled, but that's not to say it hasn't happened with some other cases. I don't know. I haven't, kind of perused the, 50 states. Yeah. But as far as emotional valuation or emotional damages, that's the area I think that the courts really do need to change. They need to recognize that the grief, the mental distress element, not just the loss of what they usually consider like some form of sentiment, emotion, is that they usually will give you compensation for that. The loss of how fun it was for you to go play with Fluffy every day, or the loss of, okay, well, I really enjoyed having Fluffy around. They'll give the loss sometimes for that. And that's what they consider part of the actual valuation. But they don't often allow the mental distress, the real hurt, the pain that comes with knowing your animal died when they didn't have to die. It wasn't an end of life. It was something far, it was short of that. It was someone who actually harmed your animal, whether a mistake or by otherwise, that took that animal's life. And that's what they haven't been giving, but they really should, because it's an artificial bar. Right. When you realize the context of these of our animals, our companion animals in society, you realize that is something that should be allowed. And that's something that the biggest question people have is like, why isn't it? And it's like, you know what? I really don't know. I think
we are getting there. We're going to get there. It's happening. But we are coming up. We are up at an hour and a half, guys. And it feels like it goes like that because there's so much that needs to be covered. But before we go, Scott, please give us some, I know there's some things you want to fill us in on and talk about a little bit. Let's shift over. Anna, thank you so much. I didn't mean to cut you off. I know it is so late for you guys. I'm here and it's only like X amount of time. I want to be very, conscious of your time. So Scott, let us have it.
So this is kind of piggybacking on what Anna was talking about. And this is all public record. So, most of you are aware of the case in Suffolk County, New York, that was filed by one of our attorneys against Patchogue Animal Hospital. New York Post reported it the other day. The complaint, the civil complaint, is actually posted in the files section of the VetMal group, and that's all I'll say about that. The point is that that particular veterinarian was trying to get away with a lot of stuff that she shouldn't have, and we'll see how that case goes. We have a case in Florida that started before that case started, and I'm expecting, and I believe that's being litigated, so that should be public record as well. I'll advise on that when I hear it. And I know we've got another one coming up with multiple plaintiffs against another veterinary clinic. The point of all this is very simple. All of these cases involve fraud. I know Anna's familiar with all of that. And it's not just about here's your veterinary cost back. Here's $1,000, $1,500 for another terrier or another pit bull or whatever the case. These cases are taking on lives of their own. And like Anna said, animal law is a moving target. Things are changing all the time. And we are going to continue to pursue those practitioners that want to do things their own way, that try to cut corners to save money and violate the law, that use unlicensed vet techs and other employees when they should be licensed, not allow them to perform surgery if they're not licensed, obviously, and a variety of other things. Point being, the area of animal law is expanding, and we are finding more and more ways to deal with the kinds of things that vet boards refuse to deal with. So we'll do their jobs for them if and until they decide to start disciplining firmly and fairly. And if they never do, well, we'll be here a long time doing what we're doing. And I think we're making some good progress. And we need all the support we can get. We got 85 million pet parents in the United States. And one day I'd love to have 85 million members of our VetMal group, but of course that's not going to happen. Our goal is education and enlightenment of the uninformed pet parent, so they are, they can best advocate for their own companion animals when dealing with those that they deal with that provide care. Not only veterinarians, groomers, breeders, dog daycare, those kinds of, basically it's anyone who causes the permanent injury or death of a companion animal. And we'll continue to do what we do. And that's all I have to say. Veterinary boards, real quick, need to be dismantled and restructured. Dr. Canizero probably knows there's 7 members on the board in Florida. 5 are licensed veterinarians that present themselves as, and I believe they are very caring, compassionate individuals during the day while they're practicing medicine. And when they turn into vet board members, it's like the Jekyll Hyde thing. It's not the same thing. It's very disingenuous on their part for the way they conduct themselves. And Dr. Canizero, I'm sure he doesn't need 4 other veterinarians to consult with on a case when she reviews Joey's legacy cases. She doesn't bring in 4 other vets. There's no need for 5 veterinarians on the vet board. 1 veterinarian can provide the clinical clarity that's needed, and the others on the board should be non-biased, non-veterinary members. They should be unbiased and not follow the leads of the majority of vets in Arizona. There's 9 members on that vet board. 6 of them are veterinarians. 3 of them are non-veterinary members. And the chairperson, from my understanding, is an animal vaccine salesperson. What could go wrong there?
Oh my goodness.
So you can kind of see, and we all know it's nothing new. They have it their way. They want to do things their way. So until they decide to do the right thing by punishing, disciplining firmly and fairly, that's what we'll do for them. So that's all.
I wondered about, I know we're like way over. I wondered if I could ask Anna a question.
Sure.
Is that, and I know I'm not the moderator. May I do that? Okay.
Please.
Anna, have you taken on any cases that involved horses? And the reason that I'm asking this question is that horse values often are well established, especially if they're a breeding stallion, a mare, or an established show record of some kind.
Yeah, I have not, because my practice, I just generally stick more towards pushing for the actual valuation and pushing for better damages for the companion animals. Because horses, they are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars in some of these cases, just for breeding stock. But my, the cases I focus on are just, regular companion animals that somebody has that mean the world to them. But it's true. The equine cases, they also, generally require, certain veterinarians who have, I wouldn't say specially, but focused, practice in equine, like they know those systems. A lot of the people, or I guess the clinics that we sue are strictly companion animal clinics. It's usually more, I guess, towards the middle of the state and southern parts of the state, that have the equine. But yeah, they do have established values, and they are often very high. And the damages there are much, much higher, which is probably why the other attorneys will take those.
Well, I want to clarify too. I actually have a client that asked me to review records, and it actually had nothing to do with Joey's legacy. She lost her horse to a specialty clinic. Her horse went through colic. And I did review the record. I haven't gotten to a letter yet, but that's another conversation. This was a companion horse. Most of us, including myself, because I have horses, I have a fairly expensive horse. If anything happened to him, I mean, many of us, even if we do have expensive horses, these are still our family members.
Yeah.
I know for me, and I know for my client, that this is a family member for her, was a family member for her. And my horses are family members for me. So I wondered, and you might be in an area where there just isn't, it's not horse country, or, I don't know exactly where you are, but if it's not horse country or whatever, then you may not be exposed to that. But I'm wondering if that would be a different beast altogether, no pun intended, for you, or that would encourage attorneys to take the cases. I didn't know, because it's horses are expensive, and if they get sick, if you think it's expensive in, companion animal, well, ours are companion animals too, so we have to include them there. For me, anyway, they're sentient companion animals. They're family members. If they get sick, if you think it's expensive in the small animal world, just step into the large animal world.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I think establishing actual valuation, maybe even, like more of looking at what you've set up, the horse stalls. It's not cheap. It's not just a dog bed. It's an entire, usually building, for the animals. But yeah, there are attorneys, and it's certainly, for us, I'm in Chicago. It's cold. It's pretty miserable right now. And there's about, 3 inches of snow or so for me to walk home in. but it's, it's usually like the city. So it's more companion animal based, but, or I shouldn't say that, small companion animal. But yeah, my mom, she's got, a small area in the country, and we have 2 donkeys, and yeah, they are awesome. They're part of the family just as much as, all our other furries. And yeah, losing them, it's a devastating loss. But yeah, I think the analysis for the equine, areas, it may be a little different, because a lot of states, especially, Illinois included, there's certain laws that apply with horses and bigger animals that may not be quite the same with the smaller animals. But yeah, the emotional losses, you would want to fight for those just the same. It's just, I get frustrated because the courts limit those in negligence based or typical malpractice, based, where it comes to the mental distress of losing an animal. Whereas, you may get more damages in fraud and other intentional acts for like emotional distress, but I think you should still get them, for the cases of malpractice, because it's a real thing. It's not made up. The people are devastated. They are grief stricken. It is, it's not the same thing. We're not, it's not a bunch of crazies that are crying over a toaster loss. It's real. And that's what
I
the court
lost my soulmate horse, and it I don't believe it was to malpractice. I still cry about that. That was 5 years ago, and it's still devastating to me. And yes, we won a lot of ribbons and competitions and this and that, but he was my soulmate, my family member. There's no other way to put it. And I went forward with colic surgery. I don't, your listeners, I mean, that's the tens and thousands, 10,000s of 20,000, 30,000. Fortunately, I had some insurance, but for my horse. But it doesn't matter. If I didn't have the insurance, I would have made the same decision. So the hypocrisy to end on, I think, is disgusting, really, in animals. I mean, if we're going to portray that it's perfectly fine for you to spend $10,000 to, do a surgery on your pet, whether that's a horse or a donkey or a guinea pig or a dog or a cat, and then turn around and say, well, should just be
It's just a dog.
Just a dog, just a $200 dog. That's
That
it.
right there is the thing I think that gets me the most is I want to charge all this money for your animal, but then if I do something wrong, I want you to see. And that's what we've seen by, the big companies who are trying to stand in our way. They're sending out all these messages, and we see it in the news now. You don't want that, your dog to be seen more than property, or your vet bills will get too high. Our vet bills are already high, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be. I think I've said this on the show a million times, there are more good vets out there than there are bad vets. Guaranteed. I've worked with several vets over the years, guaranteed. And of all the vets that I've worked for, I only really work for one who I think should never have touched an animal ever in his life. But it's just that hypocrisy right there that you're talking about, Dr. Canizero, I think gets me the most, is they just want to be able to go, oh, it's just a dog. Well, it wasn't just a dog when I wrote the check for 20 grand because he was sick.
And it's also not enough to just give back the 20,000, say like, oh, okay, well, I botched that surgery. Here's your 20,000 back. It's like, no, you took away more than that from me.
Right.
You need to acknowledge that it's not that 20,000. My animal is worth a zillion times more than that, and you need to recognize that. But the other thing too, I wanted to end on, try if you can. Like, I think another area where I think we're going to see more action is with pet insurance. Because when some of these catastrophic things happen, and I'm not joking, these are like $20, $30, $40, $50,000 of bringing an animal back to health. That's when these, potential subrogation claims come in, and it's going to get more real. So I think it's very interesting, something to keep an eye out for with insurance claims and things like that. More people that are getting insurance, it's going to make this a lot easier to bring it to the courts.
Good. I mean, in some ways, it's interesting because for years, everybody hates insurance companies, and I have been through the gamut with them myself. So I'm not going to say they're great, but there are some cases where I think the insurance companies can be helpful. And in one of those, I wonder if Dr. Canizero would agree with me. I've seen pet parents, and I'm all about diagnostics, don't get me wrong, but I've seen pet parents go to the vet when their dog had diarrhea last night once, and everything else is fine and nothing's wrong. And I will get clients that call me and go, Carrie, they want to do a MRI, and they want to do this, and they want to do all these diagnoses. And I'm thinking, man, if you had insurance, that insurance company would be like, no. Absolutely not. Because we couldn't do that to ourselves. If I went to my doctor after, not that I want to do it.
But it's also like that they're going to come in and say this was not authorized, or this was, this was wrong, or this. They're going to find if there's fraud, and they're not going to pay it, and they're going to say no. So I mean, it's when you get like battling, I guess money interests. You may actually, spur them forward. But what I also want to remind people is that, we, all of us, if we were all to band together as the companion animal owners, large, small, every which way. I had a companion goat as a kid, so all of us, if we said, hey, we are not going to use your services unless you recognize, and you actually recognize that this is a real bond, and you value that, and you're willing to pay that if you screw up, then I'm not going to use your services, period. Done.
Yeah.
And
it will. Every change always comes from the consumer. Like whoever is paying for it has to be willing to walk out. I've said it, Dr. Canizero. I have said this to my clients. I would not go to a veterinarian that sells flea and tick medication like it's candy. I just wouldn't. and I will walk out of that vet hospital so fast. And until we do that, this flea and tick medication, by the way, I don't know if you know this, Dr. Canizero, but apparently they're doing trials right now on Bravecto to be once a year.
Oh my.
Oh yeah, wait till I tell you. We'll save that for later.
We
because
should.
I
We
actually
should.
had someone
Yeah.
contacted me because her dog died in the trial. 5
Well,
days.
I tell people, you need to run quickly if a veterinarian does not want to listen to you or answer your questions.
Yep.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going to query about, your pet being ill and the vet wants to push vaccinations. The sad thing is the Board of Veterinary Medicine probably would not go after that vet for below standard of care.
Right.
Don't ask me why.
No, they wouldn't.
Because it's bad medicine. It's absolutely contraindicated. Every veterinarian should know that. I just had a new patient that was concerned because their pet was vaccinated and given Cytopoint on the same day, and the pet was ill. And I said, well, I don't know. Is it the vaccine or the Cytopoint? Why would they give Cytopoint at the same time of vaccinating or do a surgery the same day as vaccination? Because we're wanting the immune system to respond to vaccination. That's if you even go for that, which I'm the least of the vaccine pushers you'll find, and very least of the vaccine pushers. Why would you do that and then give an immunosuppressive drug at the same time, or anesthesia, which affects the immune system in an adverse way? You are inviting complications. You are inviting a bad thing to happen.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make sense to me that that isn't considered below standard of care. But I want
it very well may be. It depends. It depends on who you get for for your cases.
Well, you got to find those 5 vets that would say
you could do that. The boards are no, that's no problem. You know why? Because they've all done it themselves. That's why.
Yeah.
That's why. And
that's the.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Every
Anyway,
case like
I'm
that
going
in
to let us
Florida.
all let you guys get some sleep.
Advocate. Be your own pet's advocate.
Yeah,
please.
exactly.
Please, please.
One thing I do want to remind everyone who's listening is it is unfortunately going to take money for us to get legislation, get in front of boards, do all of the work that we need to do to get this changed, to get the documentary made, to get more voices, to get more people. So please make sure that you are donating what you can. If you can't afford to donate, then you need to share this information everywhere so that we can get more people on board with this. I have said it on the show before. If you sign up on Amazon, Joey's Legacy is a 501c, so it's a charitable organization, and you can go on Amazon and you can sign up. So every time you buy anything from Amazon, just that alone sends money over to Joey's Legacy, which is helping us to get the documentaries made. It's helping to get, the printing done. All of the stuff that needs to be done. In July, we're going to be doing a charity event, and I think we're going to be doing a lot more of those. So you want to be looking for us in your area of places, because we're going to start putting people in different spots to talk about this more. So please make sure that you are, helping, if for no other reason, in the name of your dog or cat, that I know that you wouldn't be here most likely if you hadn't lost your pets. So thank you for being that voice for your animals. Dr. Canizero, you are just a warrior. I love that you're a veterinarian that will stand up and say there's something wrong with your industry and you want to see it fixed, because there are so many great vets out there that should be able to shine, and you're making sure that happens. And I just really, really appreciate it. Anna, you are just such an amazing, we know you don't make any money doing this. You do not in animal law.
I played the lottery.
There's no money for attorneys in animal law. And so your heart is just, it's worn on your sleeve. And I just appreciate you so much for being here and fighting for these animals. You're making a difference. if
Right.
Right.
no other reason.
I mean, we do bill for our services. It's just nowhere close to what you
I
bill
know.
for, like, regular cases.
Right,
So-
right. I know, but we all know what that means. So it's not like he's going to get the $1 million lawsuit and get this thing going. So I just appreciate you so much, and want to acknowledge the fact that you practically working for free. And Dr.
Well,
Canizero,
yeah.
I mean, both of you guys, your time is it's so valuable to us. And Scott, of course, does all of this. Everything he's done has been in the name of his wonderful dachshund behind him, who Scott and I share that. We both lost dachshunds to terrible tragedies. And so, Scott, thank you so much for starting this organization and allowing me to be on and hosting you guys and getting all these questions to you. You guys are just so valuable.
All three of you are great, and
Lori.
we're glad you're on the board. All three of you.
I love being on it. Lori's behind the scenes that helps us get all of this. So I want to do a shout out to Lori. I am not a tech person. This thing would never go off if you guys expected me to do anything other than push enter. So Lori, thank you so much.
Thank you, Lori.
And to our listeners, without your questions, we wouldn't be getting all of this information out. So I just want to thank you guys so much for you're never asking us too much or the wrong questions. I apologize that sometimes we can't get to all of them. There were a couple of questions that I want to talk to Dr. Canizero maybe later about. California is now starting to scare everybody that suddenly, apparently, our mosquitoes have heartworm, which personally I think they've always had it, but we'll have to do that for a later show. But we did have a couple questions about heartworm, which I will address later on my stuff as far as heartworm and stuff. So anyway,
feel free, Mary, feel free.
Thank you. I'm going to reach out to you a little bit, and maybe we could do a little live talk on just heartworm and flea medication if you're up for it. Because
Absolutely.
I know it was a little off topic.
Let's get people educated about it because it's not necessarily what you think
or
what you're scared to be told.
Agreed. I can't wait to do it because they're like scaring the crap out of California now. It's the new thing. Like, oh my God,
California's on fire, so I think they burnt up all the mosquitoes.
Maybe, but we have to do we'll have to do one
for all of these states that have suffered tremendous losses and the wildlife that suffered losses. So I don't mean to make light of that.
No, I understand.
It wasn't taken that way. And Scott, thank you for all that you do. That I don't even think people have an inkling of an idea of what you put forth to do what you do. And
thank you, Dr.
Accolades for that. Really.
Appreciate your participation, and Anna. Anna's been around for a few years now, right? 3 years later.
I love Anna.
Yeah, big cheerleader. I mean, honestly, I'm just waiting for you guys to do your tour through Illinois, probably in the summer when it's decent out here.
No, we're not coming your way now. Forget it.
We're hoping to speak at the Animal Law Conference in Portland in November.
Nice.
Well, I'm hoping to get you guys out here in July. I am working on a charity event out here in July. So hope maybe, I don't know, we'll figure it all out. July would be a good time for you, Anna, to get out of Chicago.
Yeah.
There you go.
One of our only good 3 months of weather.
Yeah. All right, everybody. I'm going to sign off. So good night, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.